Welcome to Office Hours, episode number 38. I am Adam Coble, and you are you, and that's just great. Today's episode, like all the episodes, what came before, it's going to go a little something like this. I'm going to answer 3 questions. They're going to be about game mastering, and they're going to have been submitted by you lovely people. So you can ask questions of me about game mastering by going to my website, www.adam-coble.com, filling out the office hours form, and then waiting patiently. And your patience will be rewarded by the answering of your question. That is how office hours work. Let's get down to it, shall we? Let's do the thing. So today's episode of Office Hours begins with a question from my dear friend and fellow game master, Trista.
Hi, Adam. It's Trist. Okay, so I'm running a campaign of Stars Without Number, and due to some recent and extraordinary events, we discovered that half of the characters are very idealistic and want to do the heroic thing. And the other half of the characters are very pragmatic and want to look out for number one before trying to save anyone else. So I've already talked to the players and I've gotten buy-in, and we all really want to explore this tension between playing the hero and playing the survivor. And my question is, what are some good ways that I as the GM can really put pressure on the characters and help them develop and explore whether they're going to stick fast to those idealistic or pragmatic beliefs, or whether they're going to break and convert to the other side of what may not even be a dichotomy. There might be a third option, who knows? But how do I help put together situations that explore the character development in these ways? Thanks.
You're welcome, Trist. Also, hi. Thanks for submitting a question. So Trist has spared me the usual repetition of talk to your players, work out what everybody actually wants. She came in all stealth on this one, but usually what the first thing to do here, and she's done it already and kind of like elided that part of the question, but what you would usually need to do before you get to anything about creating narrative pressure and situational intensity, any of that stuff, is sit down with your players when you realize that there's 2 distinct camps forming, right? When one camp is the hero camp and one camp is the pragmatist camp, and you realize that divide has occurred, taking a step back from the game, talking to the players and saying, okay, hold on. So I see that you're all kind of behaving differently. Do you want to play this game or that game, or a game that's about whether we're playing this game or that game, right? So thank you, Trist, for that, sparing me having to walk through that advice again. And I think what's really cool here is that you've worked with your players to have a conversation about and develop some ideas for the main theme of your game, right? Your game is now about something. Your game is about, in the world that we've created in this fictional space, is it better to be a hero, right? To do the right thing and to protect the innocent and to fight evil? Or is it about being successful and being safe and taking care of yourself and looking out for number one? And now you have a theme. Your game is thematic, and that's really cool. Not a lot of campaigns get that. So what I think is interesting is that you're playing Stars Without Number, so you've had to do all this work yourself. Stars Without Number is an OSR game. It uses as much from Moldvay D&D as it does from Traveller. It's kind of a synthesis of those two, very much in the old school in terms of its design. And as such, as an OSR game, it gives you this fairly theme-free set of mechanisms for resolving conflict and task success without doing any of the dramatic heavy lifting, right? Stars Without Number doesn't tell you what it is about. It tells you what you do in the game. It tells you what the players should do and how they're rewarded for doing those things, but it doesn't give you any thematic content, which if you come to the table with a group that's interested in developing their own themes, good, excellent. It is the correct system, or a correct system, certainly, to do that. It also means that you and your players have the responsibility and get the responsibility of theming the game. Now, a few episodes back, we discussed the two main ways to get at the theme of a game, right? That you could do it before the game, you could do it after the game, the varying challenges of those approaches. So folks who don't have what Trist has in this situation, folks who want to know how to get to where Trist Question starts, you ought to go check that out. And come on back if you haven't watched the episode already, because that'll help catch you up. This is a good follow-up to that bit. And of course, because I'm terrible at this, 38 episodes in, I still don't know which episode that was. It was 2 or 3 ago. You'll figure it out. I trust you. Your perception score is very high. So here we are. Here we are. And we know what the theme of this game is. We know what we're going to explore. Whether or not there's a dichotomy between pragmatism and heroism, or if there's another way to thrive in the world that the game's setting and mechanisms present. And if there are those choices, which is the correct one, which is the one that makes the most sense and is right. Now, if you were playing a game that already supported that kind of exploration, I would say look to your rules for help, right? If this were a game that used something like beliefs, you'd want to look at the players' beliefs and pit them against one another so you could question what they claim to be true about the world and their place in it. If you were playing a game that used aspects, I would say compel them in alternating steps with intensity, pushing the characters to explore the facts about their personalities and desires, right? Compelling aspects is a good way to get players to think about whether they're still true or not. But instead, what Stars Without Number is giving you is much simpler. Though I still think the mechanisms of Stars Without Number are worth some close attention. I think they're worth paying attention to. Because there is something in Stars Without Number that I think that you can gently tweak or kind of guide from a GM perspective to get the players into a position where they're going to create these interesting narratives themselves. Because if we can get the players to do the work for us, if we can get the rules to do the work for us, then we're already doing pretty good, I think. And the mechanism in Stars Without Number, the thing that I think is worth taking a look at in your situation, Trist, is goals. It's the XP system in the game. Now, if you're not familiar with Stars Without Number's XP system, goals are things that the players can write themselves. And you can give out mission goals. You can say, your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to go to the planet Glorfax and rescue, I don't know, some helpless NPC. They're always in these positions. Go rescue them. I'll give you some XP, right? That's the GM saying, this is what this game is about, at least for now. If you do it, you will be rewarded. The players can ignore that goal. They can turn right and head away from Glorfax instead and go off to the pleasure planet again. But they won't get any XP for that unless they decide to write their own goals and get XP for those. Now, these generally in Stars Without Number are very concrete. Goals are do this thing, get this thing, stop this thing from happening, concrete, yes, no, binary, clear to understand. When this happens, I get XP situations, right? So that's how it's written. That's how it's written in the game by default. De facto, that's how it goes. Now, you're in a position to make sure that the players are writing goals that reflect not only the immediate material desires of their characters, but their philosophical desires as characters as well. And as we all know, the philosophical desires of the characters are the way that the player flags what we're interested in the setting. Your players are already in dialogue with you about this and with each other. You've all talked about the theme of the game, and this is a way for them to put their money, metaphorically speaking, where their imaginary mouths are. Goals, big or small, immediate or future focused, should be written with the intent to say to you and to the other players, this is a thing that I would like to be challenged about. Ask your players to think philosophically. One of the players playing an optimistic hero type could write a goal about freeing a captured ally, defeating a petty galactic warlord, doing the big hero shit, right? Players with a more pragmatic approach could write goals about stealing enough money to upgrade the ship, or goals about protecting their comrades from dying for foolish causes, right? And I guess the more that I think about it, the more that I kind of let this roll around in my head, the more I'm thinking is that I suggest you're drifting the goals from achieve X to explore Y. Treat them a little bit more like beliefs than you might otherwise do by the book. Because you want them to be about something that you are figuring out, not something that you already have figured out. The trick with goals as written, though, is that they're only going to award you experience if you resolve them. So the exploration of the meaning of the character's goals isn't incentivized in Stars Without Numbers. And that can be a problem if you, say, write a goal that's like, defeat the petty warlord who rules the fifth moon of Heifer 4. But until you actually do that, you're going to lag behind your friends who are accomplishing shorter goals. If thematic exploration is the goal here, incentivize your players to do some exploring. Give them XP every session where they explore their goals and move towards something. Whether combat, a long debate with another character, sharing a personal revelation, did they, during the scene, explore their goal in some way or another? Because if they did, you want to reward them for that, because that's the kind of play you want. You want them to create situations in which they can explore their goals. And this is going to move the game slightly outside of the direct OSR style, like fuck planets, get credits play, right? And into a more slightly, or dramatically, depending on how your players hit it, introspective, kind of theme heavy game. And in this way, you're allowing the players to do a lot of the work for you. They're going to get themselves into situations in which they're going to be called upon to explore their goals, which fits perfectly with what Stars Without Numbers is about, because in Stars Without Numbers, you don't want to create situations that do anything. This is going to seem weird, but this is how sandbox play works. A proper sandbox game is GM'd by someone who just fills the world with interesting shit, and then the players get involved with it as accords their interests. So my goal in creating the warlord who rules over his moon empire in the Heifer system, my goal is not to present something that is going to be interesting or compelling or whatever to the players. Your goal as a sandbox GM is to simply fill the world with things that make sense in context with one another. The player's job is to find the fun in that universe and go after it rabidly. And it sounds like your players are ready for that. Let's incentivize them by changing the goal system slightly to award exploratory behavior. And then the next level for this, for you and your players, is going to be about creating Venn diagrams of those goals, right? So if one player has a goal to do a heroic thing, and another player has a related goal, or a goal you can make related, and they're on team pragmatism, find ways to overlap them. So if the one player wants to oust the warlord, another one wants to keep the crew from taking on foolish jobs, give the crew a lucrative opportunity on Heifer 6 in the terrain of this terrible warlord and see what happens, right? Find ways to overlap and run goals at cross purposes, because that conflict between desires is going to get your players to debate, discuss, and probably disagree both in the moment and in the long term about how they want to operate. And don't do this from some secret shadowy throne of GM shadow darkness. Do this from the ground level at your player's height, right? Come down from your mighty golden throne and ask them questions and get excited. Say things to your players like, would it be cool if the warlord that you're trying to overthrow is the same dude that you're trying to buy weapons from, right? Ask the players like, hey, I'm gonna intersect this stuff, because again, the players want those sweet fulcrum moments where their PCs can come into conflict, and you want to put an NPC or a setting element between them, and that's going to lead to the whole piece. I can't make a triangle with my, how do you, triangle? PC, NPC triangle, right? It's going to lead to the best stuff. A couple of quick things that might run you into trouble, though, with Stars Without Number, particularly. So exploration is often reliant on the idea that even failure can teach us things, that risking something and failing can be as revelatory as success, right? That's how exploration works. Explorers go looking for a continent, they fuck it up, they find an entirely different continent, they still explored, they still discovered something, even though they're a screw up. It's still important, revelatory, right? Revelation does not have to be positive. This isn't anywhere near what Stars Without Number does by default. Failure in Stars Without Number is just failure. You rolled bad, you goofed, you don't get what you want, the end, move on. This kind of black and white binary result can lead to fear in players of exploratory play. It's a scary situation when what if is met with you're fucked, right? When you don't have a chance to have interesting things happen on a failure. I'm not saying you should coddle your players or treat every failure like a partial success, but consider altering the way the game expects you to adjudicate failure. Now, I know that you, Tristere, are familiar, and audience likely as well, with concepts like failing forward or Apocalypse World style complex rules results. So when you roll, it isn't always yes or no, it's yes, no, and I don't know, are you willing to pay for it? Think about how you can port these techniques into Stars Without Number. The best thing about the OSR as a system is that you can kind of bang it up and glue things onto it and drill holes in it and fill it with stuff, and it'll probably still fly as long as you're doing so intentionally and you know what you're doing, which I think you do. Now, the other thing that might prove tricky is that Stars Without Number doesn't have anything built in to handle ideological conflict outside of a few crappily handled social skills. It's still very much space D&D in that combat is the most mechanically developed subsystem, and if you're finding that your players are arguing about a lot of stuff, you might get frustrated, or they might get frustrated with each other and the game and you, and come to a point in which their frustration makes it not fun to play because very little gets done if it's just players arguing with no rules. And that's okay. It's just that the rules aren't helping you, and you want the rules to do their job. You want them to work. So you can hack that. You know, there are systems where social conflict is developed as a rule result, and you can build something real small without doing any damage to the rules that will allow you to resolve those situations without a big to-do. So you could say something like, okay, you want X and you want Y. Both of you say what you want and what you want the other person to agree with, the other character, state your case and roll your persuade skill. And then you look at the results and work out a compromise system. So like maybe the margin of success of the victor over the loser indicates how much compromise needs making. If I roll a 3 and you roll a 10, there's going to be less compromise than if I got a 9 and you rolled a 10, right? So I think the idea here is to get out of that rut that sometimes comes up when players want to chew each other out in character about the direction that the game is going to go, and then they end up shooting each other because that's the only rule that we have to get what we want in a lot of these games, right? If I'm like, do as I say, and you're like, no, and I'm like, yes, no, yes, and you fight about it for 10 minutes, everybody else falls asleep and rolls their eyes and looks at their text messages, and you're like, fine, I fucking shoot you in the face. Because at least that is a rule. At least that's a thing that I know that I can do. What I want is for you to have a tool to resolve that fairly using the mechanisms of the game, so that the person with the highest persuade skill is often getting what they want. We want to make those skills matter, especially in a game where talking happens often. Which in a thematic game, you know, you end up in that place. However complex the system that you want to build is, I think bumping the rules of the game a little will bring you closer to resolution at the table, whether it's a single roll like we described or a whole alternate Stars Without Number OSR Duel of Wits thing. You can do that. Go as crazy as you need to, but get your players on board before you make changes to the rules. And all of this stuff is going to lead you to your question's answer, which I intentionally didn't answer directly, right? Like I'm not going to tell you, here's how to create situations to put narrative pressure on your characters. In Stars Without Number, in a sandbox system, I want you to have them put pressure on themselves and each other, because that's your job as a GM in that space. And I think that with properly motivated players, which it sounds like you have, They're personally motivated by desire and interest and mechanically motivated by rewards and subsystems. I think the whole game will aim directly at the thing that you want without you actually having to do much in the moment. Your only job here is to engineer possibilities, not situations. The player's characters, they're the situation.
Hi, Adam. I'm right, though I go by the handle Fortune online. I'm a fairly new GM who happily spends time on both sides of the screen. My issue is that I like to read published adventures, even published adventures I'm not necessarily ever going to run. Sometimes I read old school adventures, sometimes I read more modern ones, but I always feel weirdly guilty reading them because I want to experience them as a player, and I worry that I'll never get to now that I've sort of spoiled them for myself. I mean, even if I could find a DM who will accept that I've read the adventure beforehand, there's always the problem of, like, unintentional metagaming, right? Which sucks for me, because I'm always looking to improve my adventure design chops, and published adventures are the only examples of adventure design I can look at without the hassle of actually getting into a game. My question is it possible to read and potentially DM published adventures and play in the same adventures as run by other DMs? And if so, how do I do that? Thanks.
Well, I mean, you're right. So whatever feels good to you, you should do it. But if I were in your position, and I'm not always right, but I think, you know, it is a struggle. It's a struggle. You're in a unique situation because you're getting the potential to run through adventures often enough to have to worry about spoiling them for yourself. But rare though your situation might be, it's absolutely a thing that happens. I think that there are 3 elements to this question that will help resolve your struggle, and we'll talk about them one by one. But 3 main things you need to take into account here when you're deciding whether or not reading an adventure is going to screw up your ability to play it. The first thing, my friend, is you. You are the first element. Now, I think you're already aware that there's a chance that once you know about the twists and turns of the adventure, you're going to have a real hard time making your way through it honestly, and with the same sense of blissful excitement and ignorance that a player who hasn't spoiled themselves will have. Like, let's be totally real here. Experiencing something at the table for the first time without knowing it's coming is a kind of delight you cannot have if you've read the adventure. If you read the adventure, you are discarding that choice. Nothing that anyone says can help you with that. You will lose that blissful ignorance. You'll lose that. It's just how it goes. Now, the rest is going to be a test of your meta resistance, right? I hope your save versus the metagame is quite high because you're going to have to make decisions that result in suboptimal experiences for your group when you know you're going to make that decision, right? Can you pull the lever that will kill your character because your character would do that, right? Can you ignore the secret door that you know would lead to treasure or a chance to rest? What if it's leading to an encounter that you know would be really fun and challenging? And if you don't bring it up, it's obvious the whole party is going to miss it and move on. You're going to miss content. The GM will miss content. The players will miss content. Can you sit there quietly and not say anything? Do you think your group is going to be okay with you just letting them die and have a less fun time because you're not metagaming, right? You're putting yourself in a real awkward position here for you and for everyone else. And I don't know if I could do that personally. It's just one of those things that once you know about the thing, it can be really difficult to ignore it or pretend you don't know. And I think that even if I were able to play accordingly, knowing that I was playing suboptimally would feel like using a dagger, even though a short sword does more damage, just because, I don't know, daggers are fun. It's a real thin line here. And I think it's a tricky quandary whose first answer comes from within. Do you think that you and your group would enjoy the game knowing you were playing it wrong? And frankly, in a game like D&D, where success is part of the reward structure of the game, having an advantage like reading the adventure is I think, a whole step above, say, being familiar with the monster manual. This is like straight up cheating. Like legit straight up cheating. If your GM, for example, doesn't know that you've read the adventure, you're a big old cheater. I mean, I don't think you're doing it with malice, because obviously you're worried about ruining your experience. But if you're reading it and not telling anyone and just playing like you've never read it, that's some dirty pool. Don't do that. So start with you. Does playing the adventure and failing at parts of it intentionally feel like a fun and ethically sound time for you? If you tell your group, are they okay with the fact that you've played this before and you're going to intentionally not be good at it for the sake of surprise, taking a back seat to this stuff? If that's true, if you think that you are going to be okay personally, the second thing to take into account is, of course, the adventure itself. Because I think there are lots of different kinds of adventures. We have this idea, and rightfully so, that adventures work the way that they have always worked. Early adventure modules, and maybe you don't know this, but AD&D adventure modules, a lot of them were designed as tournament experiences. They were a competitive game to see who could beat the adventure fastest and best. They would have rooms at Gen Con full of tables running the adventure, right? It would be like, you sign up, you play 8 hours of the Hidden Shrine of Tomoe-chan, and then depending on how well you did, you would be scored on it. The other way they would do it is they would take a single adventure and they would split the GMs into tables, and each GM would run a series of rooms, and you'd move your group from table to table. So the entrance of the dungeon is table 1. As soon as the group is done, the first group is done at table 1, they move to table 2. Table 2 does the next 5 rooms. Another group starts at table 1, and they rotate through until all the groups are done at the end of the day. It's super weird. There was a scoring system, if you look at the back of a lot of these adventures, where if you found all the treasure, killed all the monsters, saw all the stuff, you could very literally win the day. And this isn't to say that this is how our tables play the adventures, but it does speak to the way adventure design occurred early on. Right? And the changes that were made to those kinds of adventures, in a lot of sense, in the way that we think of D&D adventures, aren't that big, right? In the old school, adventures are spoiler-laden as hell, right? You can really fuck up your experience by reading one in advance. Death traps, locations of secret treasure, the motivation and weakness of key monsters, all that stuff can be totally ruined by foreknowledge if you want the adventure to be a fun challenge. I mean, playing the Tomb of Horrors, for example, would be completely pointless if you'd read it already. Let's be real, playing the Tomb of Horrors is pretty pointless to begin with, but now, not all adventures are designed that way. Not all modules want to know, do you make it through from A to B, but are more open-ended and ask instead, how do you get through? Or what is your version of this adventure like? I'm thinking of more narrative-focused modules, things that aren't A to B style dungeons, but sort of a setting toolkit that give the GM a situation and locations and NPCs to build with. They're a little closer to settings with a kickoff than they are necessarily strictly a dungeon. I'm thinking some of the more recent, like, big adventures from Wizards. You know, a few of the Lamentations of the Flame Princess modules, some of the DCC stuff, they give you an opportunity to play to find out what this particular run-through looks like. And in that way, I think you can think of some adventure modules like Shakespeare plays. Right? Bear with me. So, we don't attend the theater to see how many PCs survive to the end of Hamlet. Right? We don't wait to see if Ophelia triggers the madness trap, or if Horatio falls down a 10-foot tunnel and dies. We watch because what we want is to see what the costumes and the performances are like, how the director's choice around style changes what we expect from the play. We watch for the how, not the what, necessarily. And these types of modules tend to avoid that kind of gotcha bullshit that you can simply avoid by knowing it. I mean, it's not going to ruin Castle Ravenloft for you to know the terrible tale of Strahd von Zarovich in advance, because you're not playing to find out the story of Strahd von Zarovich. You're playing to find out how your characters, in particular, will interact with the ancient evil that is Strahd von Zarovich. The thing here is that there are adventures of a certain type that you can play multiple times. Because it's not about knowing where the secret door is. It's about saying, this time, I'm going to try to see if I can convince the NPC to join our side. Because last time, you know, we rolled really poorly and it went this way. Or maybe this time we're going to join the Chaos Cult and we're going to attack the Keep on the Borderlands because fuck the powers of law, right? You can come at them from different approaches because they're a little more sandboxy. Now, the last big deal element, the third big thing, right? There's you, there's the adventure, and the last big deal element is the GM who's running the adventure. Now, some GMs run modules directly by the book and will do things in the most predictable way imaginable because that's what's in the book. Now, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with this. But this kind of adherence to the details of the adventure means that your foreknowledge is going to be a great and powerful ruiner. Now, I personally am not at all that kind of GM. I will bend and warp and twist and fuck up an adventure until it is unrecognizable so that it fits the players of my game. I'm thinking of the Adventurers League and including all kinds of little details that were not in the adventure so that we can go off on these tangents about shirtless lumberjack romance, or introducing the idea of the god of thieves and their relationship with the god of madness, the dragon cult, and what it's like to be a kobold dealing with enemies who are dragons, right? Like, these things are not inherently written into the... Yeah, that's right, talking cranes. They're not written into the adventure. You're able to fill in that space and bend and move things around because the adventure is a guideline to a kind of plot that might emerge. Now, not all GMs are like that, right? Some will play very much by the book. And if you are playing with a GM who's playing by the book and you've read the book, it will be boring for you and it'll be kind of a ruiner for everybody else. But if your GM isn't like me or uses a different style, plays by the book, you can ask specifically for them to make some changes. You can sit down with the GM and you can say, listen, you know, I've read this adventure before. Is there any way that you can alter or bend the adventure a little bit so as to make some space for me? I'd still really like to be surprised. I know, I'm a big cheater. This is a lot to ask, but maybe this is something you can do. I think that it's more fun as a GM. I personally really like being able to improvise and let the narrative wander and allow the module to be more a general suggestion as I play. Eventually, it becomes this adventure-shaped fog in the rearview mirror of the madness of the campaign. And you can ask your GM to take that step for you, to do that. Admitting that you've read the adventure is the first step. Tell your GM and your players, the other players, you'd like to play it, and you'd really like it to be a fun challenge, and ask nicely, you know, acknowledge that, yes, okay, I know you paid $24.99 for this deluxe copy of the Tower of the Hell Wizard of Mount Flame Turkey's Revenge, but I've read it already because I was really excited about it, and I'm maybe going to GM it for my other group, but like, would it be cool if you changed some of the details and modified some of the traps and stuff? But acknowledge that it's work and that your GM is going to have to bust their butt on your account. And they paid $24.99 for that adventure. And that's money that they spent so they wouldn't have to do this bullshit probably. So you're asking for a lot. But hey, you're friends with your GM, right? You have a cordial relationship. Isn't that what friends are for? Doing a little work for each other so we can all have a good time? But keep in mind that GMs, like anyone in a position of power, they love bribery. So maybe, I don't know, you should be the one who pays for the adventure next time. You eager beaver, you. Ask nicely. So if you're playing the right kind of adventure, if you're willing to be a good role player and really like immerse yourself in the situation, if you can get over that, and your GM is willing to mix things up for you, yeah, you're a big disruptive scumbag. You're not really a scumbag. I don't know you. I'm just teasing. But I think you can get through. you can use the fact that you're going to GM adventures for them as currency as well. You can say, you know what, like, I know this is going to be work, but I'm going to run this for you later. And when it comes to the return to the Tower of the Hell Wizard of Mount Flame Turkey's Revenge Part 2, I'll run it for you, and you can play your character, and you can experience it that way, right? Share the load, be friends, be kind to one another, and ask for the things that you need. And then, I don't know, maybe you'll get them.
Salutations, Adam. You can call me Tara. And my question is one that I haven't quite been able to put words to until about the last hour or so watching Roleplay Live. Specifically, those brief, beautiful, shining moments where circumstances and the dice align like a decree of fate, and suddenly your giant robot is just pulling a Saitama and turns an entire iceberg to miss. Or your Death Corp's Kriegman just finds his grapnel and is suddenly putting Spider-Man to shame while saving the day. On both sides, as a player and a GM watching this happen, in my experience, these moments feel amazing. And they're what gets brought up time and again with that old phrase of, hey, remember that time when? Well, what I would like is your thoughts on, is it possible, and for that matter, should we facilitate or engineer the generation of these same feelings or some variation thereof, of these random moments of glory when a player makes a critical roll at a perfect moment beyond just the provision of just some perilous situation? And if not, what we should do as GMs to enhance the enjoyment of these moments. I know it's cheating in more than one question, but they're all connected enough that I think we'll pass the office hours TSA. Anyway, I want to thank you very much for your time and consideration, and have a very good day.
So I think, based on the timing of this question, what Teru is referring to from the Office Hours Live is from the Balance of Power Dark Side episode, where we ended with a really big roll. We ended up with a big, serious roll that ended up turning the narrative kind of on a dime at a crucial moment. But every campaign has these. Every campaign has these moments that we, as players and as GMs, we crave, we desire, like we need oxygen in our blood. When we play role-playing games, there's this moment that comes up in every campaign, and sometimes it's once, sometimes it's a few times. It's a defining factor of gameplay that we look back on and still smile and laugh about. This pregnant moment in which the dice clatter on the table and everyone's paying full, complete, intense, riveted attention, and everything just crashes together like the crescendo of some beautiful, fucked up orchestra, and we're all screaming in unison with glee or horror at the results. And it's so often the thing that brings us back. It's that addictive gambling thing that brings us back to RPGs over and over. And I think it's so important to recognize what makes those moments matter. So let's dissect the critical moment, right? Let's talk about what it's built out of. I think the three crucial things, the things that factor into making a moment feel like that, before we even get into whether you can engineer them, but the three things that when I thought about this question, I figured probably make up the critical moment are investment, high stakes, and chaos, right? Unpredictability. So we can only have these moments when it comes down to a single roll if we care about that roll. We have to give a shit about it. If we care about all the fictional moments that led up to it and all the moving pieces that made it happen, that's what makes it matter. This is why, and this is, I'm gonna be a bit of a jerk here. This is why it's so fucking tedious to hear about someone else's big critical moment in their campaign if you weren't party to the campaign leading up to it. Spontaneous climax is no good if you don't get to experience the warm-up, right? Sans foreplay, all it is a slap in the face. It's not that good. Okay, well, I mean, maybe it's a little good, but it's not like, oh my God, critical role good. We build up to these moments by playing our characters, embodying them, learning what the characters want and need, struggling for their desire, building a narrative around their desires and their abilities to get those things, diving into the world and playing the mechanisms that power it, learning the game. and really being a part of that world. Investment is huge. So to get there, we need to care not only about the fictional stuff, like, yeah, okay, if you only have one shot to take down the tyrannical emperor with this magic arrow you spent 10 sessions crafting because a whole arc of the game was about carefully inserting yourself into the imperial bureaucracy so you could change the parade route to pass by the Tower of Santa Assassino where the blessed hidden clergy granted you a vision of the future without the empire, blah, blah, campaign horseshit, blah, it's a big deal, we get it. All that fictional stuff is why we care, but we need to care about the mechanisms behind it too. We need to be invested in the game's systems. This is why we collectively gasp and clutch at our breath when the only roll that matters on a D20 is that 20, right? You don't get these moments from a 50-50 shot. Nobody gets excited about you need a 10 or better. We'll get to stakes and how that modifies this in a second, but difficulty creates immediacy for that narrative investment. If you don't understand what you have to make an ob 10 sorcery test with 10 dice and you have no more Artha means, you don't know why it matters in the moment. There's a reason why for Balance of Power, we made a video explaining the dice. It wasn't so that you as the audience would feel more comfortable playing at home or whatever. It was so that you knew when to get invested. You knew when it was a big deal. You knew that rolling 4 red dice was more significant than rolling 8 purple dice, right? Without that investment in the mechanisms, the narrative becomes toothless, right? Investment is about giving a shit in every aspect of the thing that's about to happen, whether it's for you or for another player. You care about the narration, you care about the fiction and the mechanisms equally. Understanding what's at stake and how the stakes of the role make that role crucial to the direction, not just of the intimate moment, but of the campaign writ large helps create these moments too. If we understand what's at stake, we can know whether or not to give a fuck about a roll. Consider this. Same test. You're using the same dice, same difficulty, whatever. If you fail this roll, your character dies and your soul is lost forever to the black void of darkness. Versus, if you fail this roll, your character is knocked unconscious for 1d4 hours. Stakes matter, right? Why is this roll important? Is about more than just how difficult the roll is or what led up to it. It's about what will happen. Where do the branches of our narrative go? I think if you want to think about it in terms of a visual narrative, you hit a roll. A roll is a point in the space-time continuum of your game in which multiple universes lie before you. And the closer together the fork of those paths are, the less interesting the roll. The wider the fork becomes, the more of a hard turn left or right the campaign's narrative comes from a single roll, the more there is at stake and the more likely it is to feel like this. This is why the first 2 death saves don't matter, but the 3rd death save means the campaign will go on without you or you get to live and stay in the game, right? Now, some games, like Dogs in the Vineyard or Burning Wheel, give you an immediate, clear understanding of what's at stake as you get ready to roll, right? GMing those games by the book requires you set the stakes. And I think that every good GM knows that to ramp up that hype factor, if you really want to get people excited about a roll, tell the players what will happen if they succeed or they fail. This is a way you can engineer that excitement, or at the very, very least, work the bellows to heat the sparks of excitement about a roll. This way, we know how much it means when you get that natural 20. Stakes are what tell your players, yes, kids, everything's on the line now. This one's for all the ducats. The other big thing here, and the thing that I think makes it matter, is going to seem real fucking obvious, but it's a part of this discussion, and I think it's worth it. It's the randomness. It's unpredictability. It's the gamble. That's what gets it addictive. The game, if the game doesn't include that chaos element, the moment is more or less assured, and we have no reason to hold our breath. There's no, like, pause between I'm putting my hands on the dice, I'm holding them ready to roll, we all utter a prayer to our favorite deity, and down they go, right? We don't get that if there's no chaos, if there's no randomness. We live narratively And this is where we get meta-narrative, right? So we live narratively for that Hail Mary play. The characters don't know that this is a Hail Mary. In the narration, there's probably a high-stakes situation, but the narrative above that, the story we're telling each other, is the story of the dice roll. It's the story not of will Personagetron Torbisher live? It's the story of will Sean, the player, roll a 20. This is not will Max roll a 2 or higher on this D20 and live. It's about the choice. It's about you've made the choice to make this roll. We are going to let it ride on the dice. It's gambling. It's straight up gambling. And this is why we do stupid shit like not take a medicine check because we've got a 1 in 20 chance of getting up with 1 hit point. We forget we have a 1 in 20 chance of eating shit. It's about playing a game and being in love with the adrenaline rush of the near impossible task with high stakes, with huge investment, maybe coming true. Right? This shit is prevalent in the media to such a depth that we embody the story of that last minute final effort, right? This is the defuse the bomb with 1 second left thing. It's hardwired into us. And dice are what make that possible in the narrative. So investment through buildup, right? We've spent a long time, we've worked hard, we've built our way up to this moment. We know this moment is narratively important. Stakes. If this gets fucked up, if we fail this roll, or if we do not succeed high enough, some inescapable, dramatic, intense change will happen, and we have an investment in the stakes of that roll. And then chaos, right? We do not have control. Lack of control over something that's a big deal is what makes all of this exciting. There are games without randomness that can do dramatic crescendo moments, but they're all engineered. It's never going to be that, oh God, I just peed myself intensity that rolling a die brings to the table. And the swingier the dice, the more often this comes up, right? Wizards of the Coast uses a D20 in Dungeons & Dragons because it's so fucking swingy, because it leads to this. A 20 means more on a D20 than a 4 on a D4 or a couple of 6s on a D6. Right? We know that. We know that inherently. Even if you're terrible at math, like me, you can feel that in the moment because we clue into these 1s and 20s as they come up. So with all that stuff in mind, with the anatomy of that moment built into your head, knowing that the fuel for these moments comes from investment, stakes, and randomness, can we engineer those moments? Can we force this stuff? I think, yeah. I mean, we could, but maybe we shouldn't try. Maybe the organic emergence of these moments is what makes them so beautiful. To use an awkward analogy, what's more exciting? Planting grain and harvesting it months later after, toiling in the field, or hunting a saber-toothed tiger, right? We can try to engineer specific moments that give off the this is a big deal feeling by creating intentional specific arcs in the game that lead to big reveals. We can M. Night Shyamalan our game. We can get player buy-in and investment into the story and the characters and the mechanisms we're using to create and challenge them. We can set up the Hail Mary moment, but it can all feel kind of artificial if we're forcing it. It's like that stupid saying about... It's like that stupid saying about falling in love, right? Like, it won't happen if you go looking for it. It just happens to you, and that's what makes it meaningful. I think you can engineer a situation in which you are more likely to fall in love, but love, like a nat 20, just, bam, gets you in the face when you don't expect it. If your love is getting you in the face when you don't expect it, and they don't have consent, talk to them about that. Anyway, creating investment in high-stakes play is something we should be doing anyway. These are basic aspects of good play. Give your players things to care about and make the stakes matter. Don't make rolls that don't matter, right? That's stupid. That's a waste of your energy and your players' energy. But if we're doing these things because they make fun RPG times with our friends, the pants-wetting moments will come on their own. We'll never engineer or force a moment that's as good as one that emerges on its own. Play your game not like you're sowing seeds, but hunt the tiger, right? Sometimes the tiger will get away. Sometimes the tiger will bite you in the face. Sometimes you'll get to plunge that spear into its heart and rise victorious with one last hit point, knowing that you won, right? Build investment, place challenges before your players, hook their characters into investment in the narrative, but always be on the lookout for those emergent nodes of chaos, right? Love that impossible odd. Give the players a chance to do things that are out of this world, and they'll take it. If you go looking for them, but not forcing them, they'll be there. You'll find them. Keep an eye open, right? Be willing to see these patterns as they emerge. And play games that encourage your players to do this too. Give them the mechanical means to seek out and build towards this stuff. I'm thinking things like deeds points, right? Deeds points are a focused moment of high intensity with a very specific reward that you can only get from an entire campaign's worth of energy and effort and investment. And once you have that currency, once you have a deeds point, you're only going to spend it on the next big significant moment. You only use it when it really matters. There's a functional currency there, and lots of games do this. I'm just the most familiar with Burning Wheel. D&D doesn't really have that, does it? I mean, what's the most significant thing that can happen roll-wise in Dungeons and Dragons? What's the highest stakes situation in D&D? Is it a death save? This is pretty tame if you ask me. Like a critical hit, even that's not that high stakes. It's just like 2 regular hits, and you'll always get another chance to take a swing. You really have to go digging in the fiction for D&D's kind of crit moments, but the mechanics help you. The swinginess of the dice help you, but there just isn't that intentionality there. So again, you can't, even if you want to, you can't really engineer towards it. So try to play games, if you really want more of those things, try to play games that aren't afraid to say, you blow this roll and you're screwed, but if you get it, you're a god. Stay invested, help your players stay invested, care about the narrative, but don't force the moment. It'll come. And when it does, you'll be ready. Your whole group will. So this has been another delightful episode of Office Hours. This is episode 38. Thank you so much for coming and hanging out. If you want to get involved in Office Hours, go to my website, www.adam-koble.com. Little Office Hours link up at the top. Fill out the form, ask your question. I do this every week, more or less. Same time. We post on YouTube later in the week, so if you missed the episode or you want to check out some back episodes, go check out the YouTube channel. And we will see you again next week for another episode of Office Hours.